Hello and welcome to this week's episode of ShatterCast. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we get started, I just want to ask a quick question, Derek. Do you know what my favorite part of Thor 2 was?
I do not know,
The
John.
credits. See after that intro. And welcome back to all of you who love Thor 2. I don't hate it. It's just, it's okay. And yeah, it's like, it's on the bad side of okay. Like, I would probably give it a 4 out of 10. And that's probably the lowest rating I would give to any of the movies in the MCU. And that kind of, we got...
Gabe.
No. I was just thinking about it. I actually liked Thor's 2 cameo on Endgame. So I don't know if that counts.
Okay, that's fair, but that just means that's why I like Endgame, because Endgame did better at being Thor 2 than Thor 2 did.
Shots fired.
All of that to say, today we're going to talk about sequels and how sometimes sequels do a fantastic job and other times they fall short. They try to live up to the original and they fall flat sometimes. A good counterexample is Captain America Winter Soldier. Captain America 2 was amazing. Captain America 2, holy moly. I loved First Avenger, and I think I liked Winter Soldier more. I'd go so far as to say I might have liked Civil War the most of the three, which is kind of odd to think that the first one was superseded by the second one, and the third one might have been even better, in my opinion. That's not always the case. And so we want to talk today about some sequels, and not just in the MCU, but in general. So Derek, why don't you start us off, talk to us about how you feel about sequels and what some of your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good one. The whole Captain America series, it just kept getting better. I remember at the end of Captain America 1, I was upset that they brought him into modern day times already because I liked the cast of characters, Peggy Carter and all the Howling Commandos. Like, you can't have a Captain America movie without them. How are they going to do this? And I know that's what happened in the comics, but I was hoping they would, hold on to that for a little bit. But Captain America 2 came out, and I remember sitting in the theaters, and for the first 30 minutes, I made the mistake. I watched the Avengers right before I rewatched it, right before I watched Captain America again, and the tone is totally different. And so I remember sitting in the theaters for the first like 20, 30 minutes. I was like, oh, this is the tone. We're not going to get quippiness. This is what we're doing. But then I loved it because we get like the Falcon in it. We get the Winter Soldier. Bucky comes back. And so I think that's an example of a sequel done well. Some other sequels that people usually like, Aliens, the sequel to Alien. A lot of people like where they push that.
Honestly, I'm real quick right there. I, for the longest time, forgot that Alien existed, and I only ever thought about Aliens.
Yes, you're not the only one. Most people think the series starts right there. So
yeah, for sure.
I'll share two more, then I'll let you guys take it. As Superman 2, I'm talking the Christopher Reeves version. I'm going old school. Really like that one. And then Batman, The Dark Knight with the Joker. I just rewatched Batman Begins, but The Dark Knight is still like even better. Yes, exactly. You can just watch The Dark Knight and be satisfied. The performances and everything. So those are some of my favorite sequels that I like. I'll share more, some I don't like. What about the rest of you guys?
Well, I think for me, the key thing with sequels, as far as their success goes, is having a plan. I think a lot of times the sequels that fall flat are sequels that were not originally part of the planning, because they wanted to see how the first one went before committing to another film. And I can see the wisdom in that, but you look at things like Trilogies or the Marvels, like planned out for the next 50 years kind of thing, where they have a roadmap for their story, so that they're not just trying to pick up the pieces of the previous film and just create a sequel because it'll make more money, and instead they have a story that they actually were planning to lead into. That's why I like things like trilogies, and some of my favorite sequels are from trilogies, like, you know, with Lord of the Rings and Star Wars being prime examples, of course. But you made a great point about the Batman trilogy with The Dark Knight. That one is super solid as well.
What about you, Gabe?
I was actually thinking of the Lord of the Rings too. Have you heard of Viggo Mortensen's story when he kicked the helmet? No.
Okay, so you brought it up. You guys know the meme of the guy who's like sitting in a chair and straining really hard. You see like the vein in the side of his face. He's going. And I saw that caption. Me when I'm showing someone Lord of the Rings and the scene with Viggo kicking the helmet comes up because it's like trying not to be like, do you know what happened?
Is that the one where he like broke his toe? Or
he like broke his toe and
yeah.
fell to his knees screaming, and it was so perfect they kept it. So
kept it in the scene.
When you see that, that is actual pain coming from his face.
I remember when it ended. I remember how it ended because that's it. But it's like what actually happened. It's like just something there that was a blob in the story. So
yeah.
Anyway, that's for later. But that's one of the sequels that I like the most.
I would say that the Hobbit trilogy is an example of not so much of having a roadmap, but as just trying to stretch out a story more than anything and adding content so that they have more films. Which is another thing that goes back to planning, I guess.
And this is a personal one on. We were talking about it earlier, but there are some movies that it's like, okay, well, it's just for the sake of the movie of entertainment. Sequels, step up movies, all the dancing stuff, and it's like, woo, because you know that it's not about like world building. You know that it's not about like actually a story. You know how it's gonna end. You know how it starts. You know how it ends.
Yeah, you're watching Step Up because you want to see some people dance.
Yeah, basically, it's like, ooh, that's
I'm
exciting.
there for the characters. That's why I watch.
yeah. Anyway, but I gotta say, those kinds of sequels is like, oh yeah, well, I remember this character from the last movie, and it's fun to watch him again. But you know that it's not gonna be just a big thing. It's just for the entertainment sake.
Yeah, you know what to expect going into it, you know. And I think one of the pitfalls, in my opinion, it's a pitfall that sequels fall into is when they try to. It's almost like you get a sense that they're trying to outdo themselves from the previous movie instead of creating a quality product, right? So a perfect example of that we already talked about, Batman Begins going into Dark Knight. Dark Knight doesn't need Batman Begins to be a good movie. It is a fantastic standalone movie. You don't have to watch Batman Begins to see and understand and fully appreciate The Dark Knight. It's a great movie by itself. Going back to Star Wars, I think Star Wars has a mixed bag as far as the second movie in trilogies. For the longest time, Empire Strikes Back was my favorite Star Wars movie. I thought it was a fantastic sequel. I know there's a lot of people who disagree. I liked the darker tone, the fact that, I mean, the episode 4 was A New Hope and everything was like bright and vibrant and everything's going good. And then Empire Strikes Back reminds you, hey, this is a war, people are dying, and you're fighting like this evil, force. And the heroes don't do well by the end of it. It's another reason why I like Infinity War. I like it when the bad guys win to start, just a little bit. And so Empire Strikes Back was great. Don't ask me how I feel about Attack of the Clones.
How do you feel about Attack of the Clones, John?
It's the worst Star Wars movie. It's the worst of all of them. And I'll still watch it and I'll still be like, okay, I watched it, but it's the worst in my opinion. And I will not, unless you guys force me to, I will not say how I feel about The Last Jedi because I'll get in trouble. So.
How do you feel about The Last Jedi, John?
Well,
That's how I feel about it. I liked The Last Jedi. I liked what they did with Luke. Luke was always a coward in the original trilogy.
Oh, wow.
So what he did in The Last Jedi made perfect sense.
And he learned from Yoda to exile.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yoda and Obi-Wan, they both banished themselves for their entire lives. What else do you think Luke was going to do when he failed?
John, I am excited for you and the 3 other people in the world who share your opinion. All right, we can move on.
Do you think that since so many people dislike The Last Jedi, we're going to get a cartoon series of The Last Jedi now?
Right?
I think-
Because
Probably.
so many people love the prequels now, and a big part of that is because of all of the expansion that they did with Attack of the Clone or with Clone Wars.
Clone Wars.
So
I think another thing that people, I mean, it depends on how you define sequels, but as these universes start becoming this huge thing, like the Star Wars universe and the Marvel universe and the DC universe, all these things, there's starting to create, we've seen standalone movies that still fit in that timeline that could sort of maybe be also classified as sequels because they fit into those story timelines. And I think a great example of that is a movie like Rogue One, where that was another, I think, a great approach to doing a sequel that was sort of out of order, but still within the timeline, where they really focused on just creating a solid product. I actually I watched an interview, sort of interview, it was pretty casual, with Mark Hamill, and he actually said that Rogue One is one of his favorite Star Wars movies.
yeah, I would agree with that. I really enjoyed Rogue One. What's up, Gabe?
I was just, what do you guys think of the sequels that are not actually sequels, but that are inside the character just to build up to one? Like, okay, so the one that I'm thinking is Unbreakable, Split, and Glass.
Oh,
So it's
yeah.
a sequel that it's not actually a sequel, but it's building up to the third one.
Yeah. I like them. Specifically, I will say because the focus was always on creating a really good and compelling story. And they focused on the story, and because of that, they created a good product and a sequel that I enjoyed. A lot of sequels fall into the trap of being the first movie was awesome because we were introduced to a bunch of new stuff, and the third movie is awesome because we're introduced to like what the climax is going to be, and two can feel like a filler a lot of the times. I think they avoided that with those three pretty well, personally.
Cool.
I think one thing that, to Gabe's point, I can't really speak to those movies specifically because I haven't seen them, but my understanding is that those movies were presented originally like to audiences, the public, as standalone movies, and then it wasn't until the last one came out that they were like, yeah, they're all connected and you notice. But I could be wrong about that. But that was my understanding, where they kind of flipped the script on the public with that, which was kind of interesting approach to sequels.
It's been a while. I can't remember if it was the third movie or if it was the very end of the second one when the wheels started turning. It's been a long time. I don't remember. I'm sure someone in the comments is a huge fan of M. Night Shyamalan and those three movies, and will educate all of us.
I never saw the second movie, Split, so I can't talk to it. I to Hannah's point, I do think it was Glass when they intentionally kind of, I don't know if it was a retcon or whatever. I don't know if he had planned that all along, but I know I was surprised that they're all connected, which is interesting. So,
well, what I was starting to say was that another thing that I think studios and writers tend to get tripped up on is trying to figure out a new problem or a new premise, because they start off with a really strong idea for the first movie, a really strong premise. You see this in TV shows as well, where they're just trying to figure out, okay, we've sort of exhausted this premise or exhausted this challenge. How do we move forward? And sometimes moving forward doesn't really fit, or the premise just needs to just come to a close and not create a second movie or more episodes or that kind of thing.
I think that's a good point, Hannah, because I think a sequel needs to embody all the great stuff of the first movie, but somehow move the story along a little bit. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But two movies that came to mind was Terminator 2, the sequel to that. I thought they did a good job with that. And Toy Story 2, I thought they did a good job with that.
I was going to talk about Toy Story 2.
Oh, I'll let you talk it. I'll let you have it. I was just getting ready for it. I'll set you up for that. Some movies that didn't do quite that well. I think like the Transformers movies, which I have other issues with. Some people don't like the sequel to Ghostbusters, or to like Jaws, or like some of those branded things, because the first one was so huge. The sequel didn't really carry it on. or didn't really expand the story enough. So I think there's some feelings that the sequel didn't do enough to live up to the original. So
Disney is such an example of that. Did you even know that there's like a Mulan 2 movie, and that there's all these like
Like the Lion
original
King
movies,
2,
the Lion King 2, the Mulan movie, this Beauty and the Beast, there's also a 2.
Cinderella 2.
Right,
Yeah.
but there's so many movies that it's like, oh well, it's just to see if we can grab a little bit more of that audience, but that it's those are just awful movies, and I've watched because I was like,
I've seen them, yeah. I think some people may come back at you for Lion King too, because that one I think was pretty solid. But
Lion King 1.5. That's
no,
the one
Lion King 1.5 was Timon and Pumbaa. That is not continuing the story, and it's a prequel technically. So there you go.
So that's the safe one to say is
come on.
we just had a Disney off.
I will say that Disney is learning, because I think the sequels that have been really strong have come out of Pixar. Like Toy Story being a great example, Incredibles 2 being a great example. I mean, it took 15 years to get Incredibles 2, but they were able to work a lot of great stuff into the story that continued sort of the same themes as the first one, but it created new content, new story there.
That's a good point. I mean, sequels, they have the opportunity to take what we loved about the first one and bring those characters and those storylines into something new and exciting, and that we're going to enjoy, that won't bore us. Oddly enough, Derek, when I was looking at some of your notes, talking about the Home Alone movies, it's literally the exact same thing in every single movie, but it kind of worked. So for at least a little bit. So why don't you talk about that a little bit, and we'll kind of segue into talking about how really the biggest trap that sequels have is trying to strike that balance between outdoing the first one and rehashing the first one, and kind of how that applies to us in life when we're thinking about phases of life and stages that we're in, and what does it look like to try and outdo ourselves even. So, but before we get into that deep stuff, why don't you talk to us about Home Alone?
Sure. When I was mentioning Home Alone is one of my favorite movies. Every time we have like Christmas time, it's one of my holiday movies. I really enjoyed Home Alone 1. I liked Home Alone 2 as a sequel, but as John was saying, it's kind of starting to rehash the same thing. So Home Alone 3, I haven't even seen, just because I'm kind of tired of the formula now. And so I think that's the other danger with sequels. Again, it needs to, and I think certain genres of movies can do this better than others, like comedies or whatever. If the second movie of a comedy is exactly as the same as the first one, for the most part, most of us don't mind. It's just more of the same. I think when you start getting to the third, fourth one, then it gets a little long in the tooth. So again, I think it's just this idea that we often want sequels to live up to the first movie, but also expand in some way, tell us a little bit of a different story, so we can keep cheering on for it. So, and I think,
yeah.
Go for it.
No, you think what? You had started to say something.
I was just saying, I think that's where we're kind of aiming for our faith point as well. I think there's different things that we go through in life, and if we stay the same, we get stagnant. We don't see personal growth. We can't even get depressed or just feel like we are stuck in a place. I think, like good sequels, though, we want to see personal growth in life. We want to see how things can change over time, and how things can even get better, and we can learn from the past. And so I think that's kind of where we were thinking. I think a good sequel, again, expands what the first did, but it's still connected in some way. And I think for us individually, I think it's important for us to always have this personal growth, but still be connected to our story and what we've gone through in the past. So what do you guys think about kind of those thoughts?
Well, I was just going to add that I think one, before we started transitioning into our faith point, and I can speak on that too, but one of the franchises that I don't think will ever stop making sequels is Fast and Furious.
Yeah.
They're furious about that money.
They keep raking in the dough. They're not going to stop until they're not making money. I mean, we think back to like the old horror movies, right? Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, like Friday the 13th movies. There was like 20 of them, you know, like they just kept putting those movies out. Hellraiser is another example. So I think Fast and the Furious is just like, that's no longer a product of the horror genre. We're now getting these in these like comedy action movies where they just keep making them forever. So
Tokyo Drift, calling it now. Me and Gabe, favorite ones.
Oh man, you know, Derek, when you were talking about how things change, we want personal growth and everything, it reminded me of a quote from the Assassin's Creed line of games. I want to say it was the second or the third game, when Ezio was still the main character you played as. There was a quote from one of the scenes that's set in modern day. This guy who is a historian, the character's name is Sean. And one of the things that he talks about is why he loves history. And he says it so succinctly, and it's always kind of stuck with me. He says, history is the study of change. And when things stop changing, they die. And so he was talking about civilizations and cultures, but it's equally true of us and what you were just saying, that we grow and we change and we improve and we adapt. And when we stop doing that, even if it doesn't happen right away, we start to feel that decline. We start to feel like the water is getting muddied and like we're slowing down and everything else. And as humans, we crave change. Even those of us that are afraid of it or don't like change, there's still things that change that are good that we want, whether that's getting better at things that we enjoy, and that's change. Getting closer to God and building on our relationships, improving those relationships with our family and friends. I mean, these are all examples of things that change and should change as we grow up and as we live our life. There's a few verses that we had talked about in this concept. I'm going to read just one of them right now. Someone else can speak on the other one if they want to later, but in 1 Corinthians 13, verse 11, it says, when I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. So the idea of personal growth is biblical too. And there's obviously a lot of verses that speak into changing, you know, be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. Who does that? Christ. As we grow in relationship with him and get closer to him, the things that make up who we are adjust in good ways. So that was my little 2-minute soapbox. I'm going to hand it off to somebody else. Hannah, you're smiling. You go.
Well, I think one of the things that what am I not smiling, John?
That was her Xbox username had like giggles. It was Madame Giggles. Yeah. I'm always smiling.
But somehow it got changed.
Yeah, it was like, and you also haven't been on the Xbox in like 12.
Yeah, true. Anyways, what I think speaks to me most about this faith point is the idea that God's going to take you through different seasons in your life, and they're going to look different. That may be related to your relationships. It may be related to where you live. It may be related to your career. You know, one of the things that I had to learn pretty early on was that your job is not your calling. Your job is not your identity. And if you end up making a huge career shift, or if you end up working in a lot of different fields, that may be what God is calling you to. You're called to follow God's direction and follow Jesus. You're not called to a specific job. He will bring you into different seasons and different chapters in your life. And I think relating it to the whole sequel idea, I think the best sequels highlight different seasons, no pun intended, of the lives that are happening in these characters. And it's not just like, if you look at the seasons of someone's life, the chapters of someone's life, it's not typically the same thing happening over and over again, just like with different skin, with different looks and that's I think what makes a good sequel is the realistic factor that it's seasons of someone's life, it's seasons of a character's life, and God's going to take you through different seasons.
That's good.
I was thinking about what you said, and I agree. Yeah, it's just different seasons, and we gotta keep. I remember one verse that comes to mind is, "For the joy set before him, Christ endured the cross," right? And it's like, okay, well, many times we forget that we already know the end of the story, and God has already won. He already wants you to he basically wants to give you everything, right? So we forget sometimes that, and we get stuck in the present in that first movie, and it's like, oh man, I don't know how I'm gonna get to the other one, and then we start dreading the sequel, and it's like, I don't want to go through that phase. And I'm talking about that. I was remembering the verse that you said in First Corinthians is like, okay, well, when I was a child, but now that I'm a man, right? But we dread that teenager phase, going from a child to a man. That sequel, that middle part that nobody likes, right? Everybody's like, oh, a little baby, and then it's like, okay, well, now you're a man, you just go away. But what about the teenager phase that it's still maybe it's not the favorite for everybody, and I'm talking about growth in every single area. In your job, I'm talking about your personal growth, and of course, more importantly, your relationship with God. There's also this like child phase where everything is just wonderful. Then there's this teenager phase where you don't know what's going on. And then there's this adult phase, this third part of the movie, whatever it is, where you kind of understand. You start going and you express things better, and you can even impart it to others, right? You start like reproducing yourself in a sense, right? But then we dread that part of growth, that part of teenager years where your mind is getting transformed even at a faster rate than usually it would happen, right? And it's a place where it's like, okay, well, going here, going there, going everywhere where you don't understand, but that it's so important still for growth that we just don't want to have it. But it's still there, and it's still so wonderful. And if we're still thinking of the joy set before us, then it makes so much more sense, and it's so easier to go through it. Not simpler, but easier.
Yeah, you make a good point about the fact that like we don't know how the story ends for our individual lives, and I think a lot of sequels that do fall flat are the ones that are super predictable. Like you said, the formula being rehashed. And oftentimes these characters act like they already know how the movie's going to end, in the way that they respond to certain situations and moments. And
that's why Endgame was so good. None of them saw the whole thing. They had no idea.
But when you look at life, like even in the Bible, it's good to remind ourselves, these people we're reading about, they didn't know what was happening later in the chapter. You know, like Saul wasn't on his way to Damascus and then get blinded by the Lord and then go, oh, it's Acts chapter 9.
Yeah. Yeah, no, he was terrified.
He had no idea what was going on in that moment. He just knew that he was being confronted. And he had a significant change in his life, and that moved him forward to do some pretty amazing things for God.
I loved all of that. I like what Gabe said. I think sometimes we can fear the sequel. And I think we fear sequels when we don't know what direction the director is going to take. But if we trust the director, then we're excited for the sequel. And I think God is the director of our life. And if we're willing to trust him, we don't have to fear change. We don't have to fear the different seasons that Hannah was talking about. We can look forward to it with hope. And even if we're a little nervous, we can trust that it's going to end well. And I think the other thing, when Hannah was talking, I think a lot of times, especially in the Christian circle, we're always praying for, what is God's big C calling on my life? Like, what's the one thing I'm supposed to do for the rest of my life? And I think as you mature spiritually, you find out that God, again, as Hannah was saying, might call you do this for the season, might call you do this for the season. And the commonality is that you're following God. And so I think I think sequels lose their way when they lose the point of character growth or telling a good story, where they're just chasing money or just chasing, this or whatever. And I think in life, we can lose our way when we forget that our focus should be on following God, and he'll take care of all the details, and make sure that we are growing at the rate that we need to. So.
Yeah, great thoughts, everyone. So if there were 3 points I would say that we need to remember from what we talked about is, don't be afraid of that transitional space. those teenage years. And it's not just confined to your actual teens, by the way. You're going to go through that like all the time. Don't be afraid of that. Embrace it and accept that change is coming, and it's going to make you a better person if you allow it. The second one, it's about God, y'all. It's about Jesus. So like let's keep following him and just be all about that. And the third one is that The Last Jedi is a good movie. So, you know, with that, Gabe, Hannah.
Even though we didn't trust the director.
I still don't trust Ryan Johnson, but I did enjoy The Last Jedi. So anyway, Gabe.
I did not, but
Oh, you should. I keep trying to close it, but we're out of time. We're out of time. But anyway.
That's all the time we have for today.
Thank you all for joining us. Thanks for being on this panel. Thank you for watching. We wouldn't do this if you weren't there. And we hope you have a blessed day. Remember, we love you, but more importantly, God loves you. We'll see you next time. Take care, guys. You guys ready? Yeah. There we go. Okay, here we go.
It's a lovely sound.
Gotta start with some laughter. So there we go. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of ShatterCast. Thank you so much for joining us.